Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. In this video, we've got Michelle Young and Becca Kufrin offering a sort of bonus conversation to their latest episode of their After the Final Rose recap on the Bachelor Happy Hour podcast. Michelle explains why she walked off the set and how disgusted they were that the Bachelorette producers ignored the tough conversation of Eric Schwer's resurfaced blackface photos from a 2011 high school yearbook. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals. I'm going to be live on Patreon this morning at 10 a.m. Little Friday Patreon session for you. Patreon.com/Dave Neal. And let me tell you, there is no shortness of content. We have so much to get to today. This story is just in the top of the list. One of we've covered all week long, and for the last couple weeks. It might sound redundant that we keep talking about this conversation, but it's one thing to have an apology for your past mistakes, and then it's another thing for the major corporation being the Bachelorette producers deciding in a 3-hour episode to not have this conversation, which, obviously it's a lot to unpack here. But as disgusted as they were that the conversation didn't happen, they decided to add the conversation to their podcast, which is Bachelor produced. So the comment section is just all over the place. Most people support this conversation. Some people say he was just wearing a Jimi Hendrix costume from a decade ago. He apologized. He said he'd do better. Leave the guy alone. Of course, respectfully, it's the time for us to listen to Michelle and others who have been affected by different implicit biases that exist, racism, and all the other aspects of living a life that's non-white, a life that a lot of people in our country couldn't understand because they've not walked in those shoes. So Michelle spoke to producers right after the show. We're going to get into what she had to say. Here's how it all started. She made this statement on her Instagram story, and then we'll play her added audio.
Hello, you all. I'm just coming on here to give you...
By the way, I love the entrance. Hello, you all. I'm going to start... Hello, you all.
An update. Becca and I filmed an additional segment to Bachelor Happy Hour this week where it addresses our finale with Gabby and Rachel and how blackface was not addressed. I spoke about how I excused myself from the stage, the conversation that happened directly after with executive producers because of this segment of blackface controversy that was not spoken about.
Okay, so let's just play it. Here it is.
All right, Becca, I think you and I walking into last night's episode, I think we knew a lot. We knew, just kind of, we had talked to Gabby and Rachel about everything that had gone on, and we knew that it was kind of going to just be a tough episode regardless without, this other racism controversy on top of it. And I think I know that I'm still processing it, but, we're sitting side by side during this live show thinking that that this is going to be something that's talked about, and I come straight from that James season, which was all about racial controversy and, the change within the franchise that needs to be made and that is going to be made. And so, I think me and Caitlin sitting there in the audience as this show is progressing, we're moving through Tino's segment. And then as we get to Gabby's segment, I think we were very, very shocked as we kind of started to process and realize that, the show is addressing the text messages between Eric and this ex-girlfriend that came out. But as it was going on, we were not addressing the blackface. And I don't know for those who are watching, that last segment, kind of once we got to Zach's, introduction as the next Bachelor, I excused myself on the stage. And just because I was so upset and I was so angry that I felt like I had put myself in a situation where I felt completely silenced. And, thinking about, the POC community at home, and all of us were expecting this franchise to address this and navigate through it. And we've been here before. Why are we here again? And not only why are here we again, but why are we making the same mistakes of how we are addressing it or completely not addressing it?
So it's important to kind of parse the difference between, the conversation now is more of a disappointment in the producers not having the conversation versus when this all came out, within 24 hours of this photo coming out, Eric does release an apology. He has been criticized for the black box or this or that, but I think for the most part, people understood the apology. Again, not my place to accept, but I think for the most part, it wasn't a dismissive apology. Will he talk about it more? Is he being sort of guided by producers to let this die down? We don't have any of these answers, but the conversation, because it wasn't addressed at the Bachelorette finale, is now becoming a bigger deal. So what could have been addressed in a couple of minutes in a conversation, and people say, well, why? He already apologized. Well, the idea being that the finale is the most watched episode. It's the most watched time for them to have a conversation so that people can understand that this wasn't right and why it wasn't, and not to cancel the guy, but just to keep on talking about it because not everyone sees his Instagram apology. Now, you may agree or disagree about that. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.
And so I know, Becca, you were also very upset and understood why I was no longer on the stage and excuse myself. But I think with where I'm at is hurt. I'm exhausted. I have been with this franchise for the last 2 years and have really, really pushed for different changes to happen.
And it's tough for Michelle because she collects her employment from the show. The show gave her a couple $100,000 deposit. She got paid, I'm assuming, somewhere in the six-figure range to be on the show. So you have this dilemma where you had Rachel Lindsay, who finally quit the show and said, I'm not going to support this. And then you have someone who is working for change within the show. Like take the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party sucks. Okay, now I'm not going to talk about the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party sucks as far as I see it. It's got people that are making millions of dollars off of stocks, and it's got these old timers that have been in the party for decades or whatever. So, but you can't be third party because you can't make change as a third party candidate. So do you make change from within? Big Bernie fan here. Do you make change from within or what? What do you do? So, like, I look at Michelle. Can she make change from within? I mean, she's on a Bachelor funded podcast railing against the bosses that pay her. This is a good thing, I think. I like to see this.
This mistake to be made is just unacceptable. Yeah. And it's, for me personally, there's no reasoning, there's no excuse of we didn't have enough time, because that's your statement with how you view this community then. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it was forgotten, or it was not just like it crossed nobody's mind, or it was intentionally, pushed off. Whatever the reason is, for me, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Because you're still feeling the exact same way. You are still completely not acknowledging this entire community of people.
Yeah, so there she is. All right, so like you say 3 hours is enough time, so you're telling us we're not important enough. Tough conversation. Jubilee in the comment section said, I regrettably never really gave much attention to it. I was so used to existing in white spaces, in a space where I was made to feel uncomfortable being black, that being uncomfortable and offended was my resting norm. I just used humor as my defense mechanism against it all and would smile when they called me spicy. And each season they asked me, do you have a comment? What can we as black people say to you all that you haven't already heard that will make you get it? The one person who actively tried to educate you guys, Rachel Lindsay, many of you have vilified and labeled as difficult, loud, annoying, which is unfortunately what many black women who don't take stuff laying down get called. Now, what I do appreciate about the show, and something I don't think would have ever happened for me on my season, is that you have some of the other cast members really standing with their fellow black cast members. Caitlin Bristow's and the Becca Kufrins, the ones who, instead of just posting a black box in an I'm an ally, they are showing that they understand when and how something isn't right and are willing to co-sign their friend, a fellow black cast member. Existing in a space that was never meant for you is tough. It's tiring, and it's made even harder when people don't notice or even acknowledge that it's a thing. We have to move differently, speak differently, act differently, because whether consciously or unconsciously, we realize that to not do so, we are inadvertently subjecting ourselves to all the stereotypes that have been placed on us unwillingly. Ghetto, uneducated, difficult, undesirable. Anyway, thanks for listening to my TED Talks. Great comment by Jubilee. Now I'm going to play a couple more clips. These were compiled by Bachelor Rabbit Hole, just doing a fantastic job with their infographics.
I think me,
here.
you, and Caitlin sitting there in the audience as this show is like progressing. You know, we're moving through Tino's segment. And then as we get to Gabby's segment, I think we were very, very shocked as we kind of started to process and realize that, you know, the show is addressing the text messages between Eric and this ex-girlfriend that came out. But as it was going on, we were not addressing the blackface. And I don't know if, for those who are watching, that last segment, kind of once we got to Zach's, you know, introduction as the next Bachelor, you know, I excused myself on the stage. And just because I was so upset and I was so angry that I felt like I had put myself in a situation where I felt completely silenced. I think me, you, and Caitlin sitting there in the audience, I did sit down and speak with some of the executive producers about how this was handled. And they haven't seen me visibly upset like that before. But to really express that, like, I don't want an apology. I don't want a reason.
You know, what I would like to see is, what does she have any receipts that they were going to cover this on the episode and then they didn't? That would be nice. They say they were all there, but Becca, Caitlin, and Michelle, they said they were all there because of the blackface controversy, because Michelle was going to speak out about it. I'd love to see if there's any correspondence there. Drop a receipt.
I want this to be fixed. I want these mistakes to not happen because they shouldn't be happening. Period. You know, we've been through this however many times. I did sit down.
And I guess the question becomes, and don't take this as sort of an endorsement for one opinion or the other, but I guess the question does become, when there is a finalist in the future that has something problematic from their past, does it have to be addressed on the finale? Did the show think that they did enough by letting him address it in an Instagram post and then they could move forward? And is the reason why they addressed the text messages and not blackface because it affected the integrity of the show? And I say integrity very loosely.
He had posted on his stories about it, and a lot of the DMs he's been getting are people brushing it over too and saying it's not an issue, and if somebody apologizes and it happened years ago, don't keep bringing it up. But that's the problem. It's like, we still have to have these conversations, right? Like, we were having this conversation, a very similar, very, very similar conversation on my season, which was back in 2018. And at that point, I was in a different headspace. I made a ton of mistakes, and I was definitely in the wrong. I handled that situation so poorly, but we still had the opportunity to address it and talk about it. And since then, I have still been trying to be better, and I will always be better, and I will still always make mistakes. And
of course, she's referring to her a fiance at the time, Garrett, who had liked Instagram posts, which you could objectively say is not as bad as blackface. That's just not a comparison I want to get into. But the fact that they covered that, and then some might say blackface is way worse than scrolling through Instagram and liking what ended up being racist jokes. It's hard to compare two different things. But the fact that that was covered 4 years ago, and then 4 years later this isn't covered. Other people had mentioned that the Rachel Kirkconnell Matt James situation was covered during Matt James' season because the season so heavily rode the wave of the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, this just goes to show Bachelor, the TV show, is a corporation, and all they care is about money and playing whatever narrative makes them money. And so many companies rode the Black Lives Matter wave when it was profitable, and now it's not in the news as much, and that's not the storyline they decided to cover. It just goes to show that them as an identity, corporations are psychopaths, and they don't have feelings, and when you try to hold them accountable, it's not a person. You know, it's just random producers whose names I don't know.
Learn about implicit bias as teachers, because we're dealing with youth and creating and molding different, like, young minds to better the world. We have to do that as teachers, right? In a world where we live in a very diverse world, why wouldn't you want to have that same type of professional development because of all the different walks of life that are coming into the show? And yes, it's reality TV and there's business to it, and I get that. But at the same time, you want real love stories. The viewers want real love stories. In the end, in order to get that, you have to understand the people that are there, and it can't just be white people. Exactly. And so I do think that professional development should be something that should be a priority. We learn about...
And I'm sure people might be interested in what I just said, so I looked it up. If corporations are indeed persons, their mental condition can accurately be described as pathological. Corporations have no innate moral impulses, and in fact, they exist solely for the purpose of making money. So that's why these conversations have to happen, because if you do not force change will not come. Money will just keep on getting printed by the corporations, and people will just keep on cashing their checks. All right, my alarm's going off. I guess I should wake up. It's an early morning, folks. So anyway, that's your story there. Let me know what you guys think. We have a ton of information coming out right now regarding some other stories. I'm already getting a ton of messages sent, so we'll be covering that all morning long. Definitely follow me on Instagram at DNeals, patreon.com/DaveNeal. Do me a favor, please be open and loving in the comment section. It's a Friday. No need to be an a-hole, okay? Let's just try to have as much grace and empathy as possible. We'll talk to you guys in a little bit. Bye, guys.